we wanted to say something with the stuff we were doing whilst being funny and using comedy to say something.
Funny one, but we finished uni with a lot of people being like, this show is brilliant, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Like,
we're going to be famous.
How much can the audience continue to laugh as the bodies literally keep piling up?
Yeah.
I know that particularly my body, some days I have absolutely fine days and I am completely fine, and other days I have days where I know I'm going to have to say I can't do a lot of physical stuff today.
It was always do not talk. Like, do not talk. If you find that you're talking for too long, and we can be guilty of it as well.
Incredibly guilty.
You remind yourself that actually go away, do something else, come back later. How would a man eat a carrot? And how is that different to how a woman eats a carrot?
Hello and welcome to the Make It Work podcast. I'm your host, Cluanny Saunders. I'm an actor, writer, and theater maker based in London. So often performers are encouraged to make their own work, but many people just don't know how to start. In this podcast, we want to talk to people who are out there making their own work. You can learn more about them, their process, their challenges, and their wins, and perhaps it will give you some of the tools to help you get out there and do it yourself. Join us, learn with us, and let's make it work. My guests today are 2/3 of Silent Faces Theatre Company, Josie Underwood and Cordelia Stevenson. Silent Faces are a London and Liverpool-based female and non-binary-led theatre company. With collaboration at their core, they employ their unique combination of serious and silly to make physical, political theatre that tackles big issues. As an integrated company of neurodivergent, disabled, and non-disabled artists, Silent Faces are passionate about diversity, equity, accessibility, and representation. So welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you
I really
so much.
appreciate it. So usually what I do is I start by talking about where people have come from, the training that they've received. I know you guys met at Goldsmiths University.
Yeah, we did.
Where you did your training. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was 2012 that we started our degree. And essentially Goldsmiths is an arts university. It's very much known as an arts university, very famous for its like fine art course essentially, but also for humanities and theatre and music as well. And I certainly myself was drawn to it as a kind of alternative to drama school. I knew that I wanted to not only be a performer, although I loved that, but I kind of was like, 18 years old, do I want to be a performer? Do I want to be a director? Do I want to make my own work? And Goldsmiths, essentially that course seems to be the one that would allow me to kind of explore all of those things. And we began working together in our second year. We worked together in our first year, didn't we?
End of our first year, we did a module together, and that was the first time we sort of met and clicked. And then second year, we did a little bit more stuff together. And then third year, we spent more time with Jack, who is the third member of Silent Faces, doing a clown module.
Yes.
So that was where we kind of, the three of us came together.
And I think in terms of kind of, I'll let you speak in a moment as well, Jose, but kind of for me, it was that module which was called Audience, about that kind of work where you kind of bring the audience into it. And a lot of that, which was clowning, that made me go, oh my gosh, this is it. And it was sort of the thing that I'd always known that I liked comedy and physical comedy, but like that was the kind of spark moment that I was like, oh, I really, really like this. And working with Josie and Jack, there was like an instant like, okay, we're three people who find each other funny, and as a combination of three quite different people who are all funny in their own way, like that really, really worked.
Yeah.
And that was such a delight. And then from there we were like, right, we've got to find a way of making sure that in our third year we can be together again.
Yeah. And then we did a module in our third year, which was a devising module. So we had, I think we had something ridiculous, like 3 months to make a show. And we were put in a group of us three and a couple of other people. And we made our first show during that. And there was this bind of the kind of the audience module and the comedy and clowning and silliness. But then also we wanted to say something with the stuff we were doing whilst being funny and using comedy to say something. Which was another thing that kind of tied us all together in that we didn't want to just make a slapstick comedy, purely comedic kind of work. We wanted to do something that gets a little bit gritty and political, and that's where our first show, Follow Suit, came from. So
yeah. So you came out of university with that show made, ready to go.
It was half an hour. It was supposed to be half an hour. That's the cutoff that we had for our final piece of work for our degree. Probably was about 35 minutes.
Yeah, it was edging on
We were
40,
naughty.
wasn't it?
But, and then we extended it. We added an extra section, which made it probably a 50-minute show, maybe a little bit shorter, because in Fringe, you kind of need an hour. 50 minutes, like, minimum. It probably was just under.
I'd say 47.
But yes, it stayed it mainly stayed how it was when we finished uni, but there were changes as well. So we redeveloped it whilst trying to navigate the world after you finish your degree. Like, what the heck am I doing? So kind of redeveloped it in our free time. And then,
this was before we realised that the Arts Council is there to pay for artists to do art. So we just were like, okay, well, we'll do our jobs, and then on our evenings off, we'll all get in a room and continue making, which is how we kind of continue. Luckily, we had this 3 months of work that already was the basis of a show, the majority of a show, and then we just kept editing and adding and playing, and then it turned into this fuller length piece,
which we then took to Brighton Fringe for, I think it was like 5 dates.
Yeah,
it was like 2016.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, in the summer, and that was our first kind of foray into actually
Real
being
world.
out of the bubble of university, because the bubble of university was a weird one as well, because I don't know, it's a funny one, but we finished uni with a lot of people being like, this show's brilliant, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is incredible, like,
We're going to be famous.
this is the best thing that's ever happened. And then, the minute you leave, you go, oh, all those people that, that's really nice, they're very supportive, but actually, maybe that's not true.
Maybe it's only okay.
But no, it was a good show. It
was a great show.
really
You got
good
some
show.
really good reviews for that show.
I loved that show.
Yeah.
Tell us about that show, because we've sort of just named it, but we haven't actually said what it's like as a piece.
Yeah, so that show is the most silent. All of our work is, up until the most recent show, has been pretty non-verbal. And that show sort of started as a completely non-verbal show. We added like little drips and drabs of words here and there. I think there's like one sentence in the show, but generally it's a non-verbal show, and it's clowning, and it is play and silliness, and it is about a office space hit with major disruption, and so it's these office workers trying to get on with their jobs, and then a person comes into their office and brings a body bag and kind of slams it on their office cupboard, and they continue to try to distract themselves from it. So it's a chance for us to play in a very clowny way, but also talk about corporate responsibility and what do we distract ourselves from, and what are we comfortable not addressing in the work that we do.
Yeah, like very, very complex subject matter to try to tackle without words. And we gave ourselves like a real task, very much from the beginning, wasn't it, Jose? It was that whilst we were at uni, it was very recently had been the Charlie Hebdo
Right.
incident.
Yes.
Yeah, when people went into the offices in Paris and killed a lot of people. And it was inescapable on the news cycle. And I kept saying it was right at the beginning, January, sort of must have been 2015, when this was, all over the news. And this was when we'd started making the show. And we were talking, we're going to make a clown show. It's going to be funny. It's going to be silly. And I was like, but we have to talk about this. And that's where the office and kind of a normal working office hit with absolute chaos. That idea came from.
And also this idea that it was a satirical magazine and who can say what. That was a really who's allowed to satirize what, who can say what can you make fun of? Like that was always there kind of slowly melting away. As we were kind of working on it. And then it became, as you've said, this idea of what we were calling at the time distractivism. So feeling like you're being an activist and you have something to say by maybe writing something like on the internet. But actually what you're doing is not really addressing anything. You're just making yourself kind of feel good. As if you're making a difference, but you're not really. And this is a whole process. It was such a process. And then it came to being that we had the place, the structure of the office, which was so helpful for devising the clowning, kind of what would you do in an office if you had all this stuff, but you were a clown and you kind of were doing a clown's version of what people do in a big boy's office. Like, what do you do?
Opening your briefcase and shutting your briefcase.
Yes, I'm signing documents, and that's really important, even though the documents don't say anything. And that mixed with then this idea of the chain of command. So in anything we do, there's always someone above you to blame. And particularly in a kind of corporate situation, like the rungs of the ladder. But actually, even if you're the little man, and you're just the person who dots the I's and crosses the T's, are you culpable for something that's happening further up that you're just ignoring? And essentially, they're ignoring. So it's totally a visual metaphor for the fact that, and for you again, that came down to the stuff with Nestle at the time.
Yeah, well, it was the idea that particularly Nestle are a notorious company for just not... Am I allowed to swear?
I mean, I think maybe not on YouTube, but I can cut this bit out,
You haven't sworn.
Oh, I haven't sworn yet. I caught myself first. But they're notorious for not giving a crap about actual people and how their corporation affects people's actual lives, and in some cases there's a whole horrible story about breast milk that Nestle basically got women to wean themselves off breast milk to buy their breast milk, and then once you wean yourself off breast milk, you stop producing breast milk, and then they have to pay for the Nestle products. And I remember my mum telling me that story as a kid, and it really hitting me. And then just they've continually like privatizing water and like horrible things like that. And we played with the idea of, working for a company like that, even if you are not the person making that direct decision to neglect someone's human rights, you are a cog in that wheel. And at what point do we stand up and say no? And do we do that? And is that our responsibility? Where does that lie? And so it came a long way from the Charlie Hebdo office attack to this idea of, it kind of almost simplified down to an office of an idea of office hit with destruction. That then went, okay, what if that destruction was from within that organisation. And
what if you could simplify the metaphor right down? So this is a whole devising process that, again, as we've said, we were so privileged in that kind of university bubble to have all that time to work through all of this, but then to distill it down and go, okay, and this is why we talk about our work being quite often about it being metaphorical, in that it's what's the best way to show rather than tell, and make the big, the serious, the tricky simple. And that essentially became this visual metaphor. And Follow Suit is probably the most metaphorical, and had many interpretations from people who came to see it. That was always a fascinating conversation with audiences. But yes, if you could distill it down, and to make it the simplest but most serious thing is that people are dying and we don't know where that's coming from, and bodies keep arriving in this office, and they are the skeletons in the stationery cupboard. So they get
literally skeletons in the closet,
getting shoved in, and these office people who are really stupid, who the audience absolutely love because they're very, very silly. How much can the audience continue to laugh as the bodies literally keep piling up?
Yeah.
And that was it's almost the kind of test of the show, and interesting in performance as well, how different audiences would stop laughing earlier, or like, could you get them with something that's really funny again to laugh again and then be reminded of. And again, it goes back to that initial thing of one of the main things we love about this form of clowning is the audience connection.
Sure.
That if you're looking into an audience's eyes and you're like, play with me, what happens if you then, change the game, and they're looking at you and they're like, oh my gosh, you're responsible for this. Like, how does that make you feel? And it's quite a visceral response from a lot of people. It was a very divisive show.
It was a divisive show. And there was also the element of how much were those clowns the victims of what was going on around them, and how much were they active perpetrators in the horror and the violence surrounding them. And audiences were really split down the middle of, I still loved you at the end, or you guys were awful. And what point do they change that?
Do you think, so you're saying you're putting clowns in sort of these awful situations, political situations, and you're carrying some really heavy messages with these shows. Do you think the comedy and the lightness of it helps the pill go down a little easier with your audiences? Was that anything that you thought about? Or I
think in a way it helps. It is a bit of a spoonful of sugar, but it also makes the punch a bit harder, because when you're laughing and you're relaxed, when the blow comes, it's more of a drop down to that level. So it's a mixture of the two things, knowing that laughter really does relax people. It relaxes audiences, and it's much easier to get an audience on side when you are playing with them and bringing them in that way that clowns do. But on the flip side, you're making them feel really relaxed, and then you're kind of, the tickle and slap method that we always talk about in our work. And it is that we rely on, and it is the kind of multifaceted nature of that can be really effective for audiences. Because a lot of the things we talk about, in our 3 shows, we talked about corporate responsibility, we talked about depression, and we've talked about gender inequality. These are massive topics, but all of our audiences, they need to be on side for you to have that as an open conversation, or any of those discussions. And laughter really helps with that.
And you're also aware that, often in the theatre, one of the things that we really, really want is, to be entertained, yes, but a lot of people want to go to laugh, to have a nice time, and to give that, and then kind of sneak your, sneak your issue in. That's it's very purposeful. I think that's the thing. It is very, very purposeful.
But also that all of these issues we talk about are nuanced, and And again, it's easier to talk about nuance when you are relaxed and open to hearing all sides of the discussion, which the comedy helps with, I think.
And so your next show was about depression, as you mentioned, and it was called A Clown Show About Rain.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that show, and maybe I can ask this question kind of in conjunction. Where do these ideas come from? You talked a little bit about Hebdo, but for this next one, where did it come from?
This show literally came from a dream that I had. I had a dream that we did a show called Clown Show About Rain, and we had, when I had this dream, the dream was very different to the actual show, but we'd been having conversations about making a show about mental health whilst we were talking about what our next piece of work was. It was a couple of years after we'd all graduated university and we were finding our way in the world, and each of us deal with different mental health issues. And it was really present in our lives at that time to be talking about mental health. And I think one of the biggest things about mental health is that you have to talk about it. And we wanted to encourage people to talk about it. And then I had this dream where we were doing this show called Clown Show About Rain, and I went, I love that title. So I forced them to say yes to that title. And then we took it into a rehearsal room. And the metaphor for this one was about weather and how you can't control the weather, but it is always there. So sometimes you will have a sunny day and the next day it could be raining and you can't do anything about it, but you have to endure both of those things.
And also that everyone has the weather.
Everyone
so
has
the
to
weather
deal
is
with the weather.
there, at all times, and is unpredictable for everyone. And then as we developed this idea of obviously the title, Rain, as we developed that, we came again to be making something very non-verbal, and it had to be a clown show. That was the title. Also something about naming it as a clown show this time felt really, really important because it's way more popular now, but I think at the time we were making Follow Suit, there seemed to be a bit of a like, is it clown, is it not clown, what is clown, ooh, like that people have kind of opinions about clown, and it makes them think of certain things. So
and there's definitely still people that would say that our work is not clown now at this point, I think, which is why we describe our work as devised theatre, because that's what it is, really. And we use elements of clown and elements of this and elements of that.
But so to extend that metaphor of the weather, there then became this character who had the weather like everyone else, but also this almost like a gap in the ceiling, even if there was no ceiling, that a drip was coming through. So Josie's character had this kind of like beautiful drip like landing on her head, and it would happen, and she can see the water but nobody else can, and the drips then start to come more frequently, and then they end up not just being above her head but they're all over the place, and she's gathering buckets. So these kind of they ended up being on a boat, sailor clowns, sort of fishermen, or they don't do any fishing, but they are wearing lovely, very sweaty waders,
incredibly sweaty waders.
And she had these buckets, so she would try to like keep everything together. That was the kind of catch all the drips until the closing kind of moments of this almighty storm, where suddenly the two other sailor clowns are there with her, and they can finally see what's going up, and she finally speaks and lets them and explains what's happening. But again, such a gentle show after doing quite a violent show, really. But I just love that show. It was so beautiful.
Yeah, and we really want to redevelop it for young audiences because it naturally had, because it was so non-verbal, it really worked. We went into a school and did it for, I think it was like year 2s through to like year 6s. So much younger audience than the show had been made for. and they absolutely loved it. And we hadn't planned for that at all. So, and we still would argue that it's really important to talk to kids about mental health, to talk to everyone about mental health, but to talk to kids from a young age about what they're going through and be able to articulate things. So we'd love to redevelop it as a children's show.
Or a more family show as well.
Yeah,
because
family show.
Even in Edinburgh when we did that show, so we did, both Follow Suit and A Clown Show About Rain. We did 4 months in Edinburgh. Whenever there was a child in the audience with the adults, there was something just magical, just a kind of lift that child or those children would laugh at things that the adults wouldn't, and then you're kind of seeing it through that child's like innocent sort of eyes, and it was just lovely.
It's a much more visual show. I'd say all of our shows are very visual, and particularly because majority non-verbal.
Can you talk a little bit about why you decided? I mean, I know clowns are often nonverbal, but why was there a decision so early on to do nonverbal shows?
I don't know.
I don't really know. Do you know what? I think we never delved, whilst in our training, into clowning with words. We never did that. And I personally have done a bit of that since. But I think it's something recently, I think actually during the pandemic, I did a lot of kind of like online clown workshops and things. And I did a kind of Q&A where... with a clown teacher called Angela De Castro, who's amazing. And I said to her about, I asked her that question. I was like, you know, does a clown, are you still a clown if you speak? And I think she said, a clown doesn't have to speak unless they have something to say. Unless if they need to speak, they will. But you only speak once that's your only option. And I think that's kind of beautiful. And I think that's the reason. I think we all work really, really visual. We all love physical comedy. You're a really big kind of movement, like dance person, and that's kind of in your bones. And all three of us have ridiculously expressive, stupid faces. And that's kind of our greatest asset. So I think, it became it, and also it's devising. So writing then therefore felt like a different thing that we weren't necessarily ready to approach when we did the first 2 shows.
I think that's really interesting because it is. I don't think it is that we chose not to make non-verbal work. I think it's that we chose to make the shows that we made and they didn't need words.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting question because I genuinely don't think there was a point where we went, oh, no, we don't want to talk.
Yeah.
It was just that we didn't need to.
Yeah.
Because there was so much that we were doing that explained itself visually that we didn't need to add words.
And certainly with Follow Suit, the lack of words kind of, it almost like releases a different kind of creativity. So the words that are in that show are single words that each character says. One character says right, the other says great, the other says so, and the other says okay. So they're just these business people who are like, right, great, so, okay. And like, how many different ways can you say something with only those 4 words?
Yeah.
And as you say, there's one sentence in it that Jack says, which is very funny. But yeah, it just feels right, I think. We didn't need to speak, and therefore we didn't. And also, I think with Follow Suit, as we went along, we were like, this makes the work so accessible in a different way as well.
Yeah.
That it's for anyone.
Yeah, our first 2 shows, we were always really keen to... We were going to do Follow Suit at the Prague Fringe, which was really, really exciting. But then obviously lockdown happened and the Fringe got delayed and it never happened. So we'd still love to do that. But it does mean that the work is a bit more international as well, or can be made international.
So I think we should move on to Godot as a Woman, which was your last offering at the Ed Fringe last year. And I saw it there. I thought it was wonderful. Really enjoyed it. So tell me a little bit about that project, because it's linked to a very famous play, or it has, some references to a very famous play. Tell us where the idea came from for that piece.
Yes, the idea from that piece came from us going to each other, right, what's next? How can we grow as a company? What can we do? And I don't remember which one of us it was. I think it had been a kind of like, there's a kind of group love of Beckett that's always been there. When we did this audience module when we were at university, not us, but another of the groups did one of Beckett's plays called Act Without Words, which is a non-verbal play where you literally follow the stage directions of Beckett's text. And you'd done a kind of Beckett module, and all of us kind of have, we all know that we have this thing about Beckett. He kind of aligns with our work in lots of ways. So I don't know who it was. Do you remember? One of us said, let's do Waiting for Godot.
Well, yeah, we were talking about, and we do joke about in Godot as a Woman, we say our past 2 shows was a clown show about corporate responsibility and a dance piece about depression, and it's this 2 very niche shows. So let's do something that might get us an audience for once.
No shame.
Yeah, no shame. We wanted to access wider audiences, and we knew that if we did a show that audiences recognise the title of, we might be able to access a different audience to the audiences we'd already been performing for. And so, yeah, we talked really seriously about doing Waiting for Godot, and we were really excited about doing that. And then as we talked about it more and more, and we talked about it with other theatre makers and friends and family and all sorts of people, it kind of came about that lots of people said, oh, you won't get the rights. And we wouldn't get the rights specifically because Beckett stated that he only wanted men to perform Waiting for Godot. Mm-hmm. So we continued talking about it, thinking, oh, we'll get around that. They can't still be upholding that ruling now. So we had lots of meetings about the next stages of applying for the rights, and then someone said in a meeting, okay, on our to-do list is apply for the rights to do Waiting for Godot, and then if we don't get the rights, to start making Waiting for Godot. And then we all kind of looked around and were like, oh, is that better?
Yeah.
Is that more fun to make? And yeah, it just sort of started rolling from there. We did start making Waiting for Godot, and we did a silly little R&D at Wilderness Festival where we performed it, and it was very, very early rendition of Godot as a Woman. And then we spoke to the head of theatre at the Pleasance, Nick Connaughton, who said, you can't do that either because there is already a play called Waiting for Godot. So we weren't allowed to do that either. So we then spitballed a bit and came up with Godot as a Woman, and then continued making it from there.
Is it a reference to the Ariana Grande song?
Of course.
Yes,
absolutely. And that's kind of, again, like the, I think even with that, it's so hard to know with these things, like where things come from, like genuinely. And the process of that has been such a kind of, muddle of different things. But I think that Godot is a Woman as a title, because after you've done the R&D, and there were bits of music in the research and development, but not pop music. What did we have? We had Steptoe and Son.
We did have Shaka Khan.
Did we?
That was the first thing we made was a dance to Like Sugar by Shaka Khan. Mm-hmm. And that was in no way related to Waiting for Godot whatsoever.
We did it in a rehearsal.
We did it in a rehearsal. We had a lot of fun. We found it really funny. And so we went, okay, how do we get this into a show about Waiting for Godot?
And then Godot is a Woman, we, came up with various different titles. I can't remember, lots of them were probably awful. Godot is a Woman were like, oh, that's kind of an Ariana Grande reference. And we were like, okay, we've already got Shaka Khan in there. And then it kind of became, that there's that pop music was going to be part of this show as much as Beckett is part of this show. And then that, where we are kind of now, is a really interesting, not necessarily something that you think of immediately when you see the show, but is about what's high art and what's low art, and like what's important. Like in the show, this idea of a classic, the fact that Waiting for Godot is a classic, but also that Madonna's Like a Prayer is a classic. Yeah. And kind of like how, it's certainly in British culture, how we kind of identify what's important in terms of culture and art. And
what has cultural value.
Yes.
And And it's really interesting from a feminist perspective to look at the cultural value of something like Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot in comparison to the cultural value of Madonna's Like a Prayer, because those two things have major impact on British culture, on global culture. But they are very, very different styles of art.
Yeah.
And for some reason, one of them is high art and the other one is not so much.
Yeah, it's popular.
It's just popular and it's fun, and that kind of dismantling of that a bit was really interesting for us as well. So Godot as a Woman is a real clash between the world of Waiting for Godot in this Beckettian absurdism about what it is to exist and what it is to be a human, and what are we waiting for. And then a celebration of female and trans and non-binary artists who have made brilliant art in the past 100 years or whatever.
On your website, I'm going to read this. You described yourselves as an integrated company of disabled and non-disabled artists. And I also know you work with Stopgap and Disability Arts Online as winners of the inaugural Integrated Fringe Award for Brighton Fringe. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and maybe why inclusivity is so important to you as a company?
Yeah, absolutely. We are, so when we first started working together, it was really important to particularly Jack, who has fibromyalgia, that we work as a integrated company. And then since that time, I have also had a diagnosis of endometriosis and fibromyalgia. And so we work a lot physically, but also with these invisible disabilities, and how that impacts our work and how we want to empower other people who have physical disabilities to feel like they can still make work. And that is not a barrier.
And largely invisible disabilities as well was hugely part of the work we did with Disability Arts Online and Stopgap. That was for Follow Suit. So that was in 2016. That was a bursary and also mentoring from those two companies and assistance essentially in what it is to be an integrated company. And essentially it's a kind of beautiful way of looking at it, that a lot of companies are integrated, they don't even realize that they are, but actually really kind of pinpointing that in your practice. I think there's a lot there about with us is that our work is incredibly physical, but we don't necessarily, looking at us, have the bodies of a physical theatre company, or we don't necessarily you wouldn't necessarily know that there are those invisible disabilities going on, and that spreads also into mental health issues as well, and how you navigate and you kind of develop your practice into a way that everyone is kind of catered for and supported. And that was just really, really important to us, and was something that we were assisted in kind of working through how we developed that whilst working with those two organisations.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in that way we have always, and we continue to, the work is never done, we continue to make sure, or try to make sure, that our process is accessible to everyone, particularly in audiences as well, but particularly in making the work. We want to make sure that everyone is in a space to be able to do their best work and be as creative and have as much fun in that process as they can. And that is obviously affected by your mental or physical state. And so just even simple things that don't happen in every rehearsal room, and I think should, like check-ins at the beginning, because I know that particularly my body, some days I have absolutely fine days and I am completely fine, and other days I have days where I know I'm going to have to say I can't do a lot of physical stuff today, or even from a mental health perspective, I'm in a very fuzzy space, and I know I'm not going to be as articulate as I might be in another rehearsal.
Or that this day we might need more breaks, so we might go 45 minutes and then have a 10-minute, 15-minute break. then come back together, another 45 minutes. And it's amazing how actually that becomes more productive. In fact, reflecting on how we used to work, particularly when we were at university, we'd go for like sessions of like 3-4 hours, and by the end of it you're all like and actually it's also that thing of like getting stuck on an idea or something not working, and actually putting in those structures where you work for a certain period of time and you take that pause to then come back, kind of recalibrates your brain. And certainly, you know, for neurodivergence as well. So Jack is ADHD. I am undiagnosed, but I'm sure I'm dyspraxic or autistic. That's in my family, and that's something that I'm currently exploring for myself. But even without those diagnoses, it's something, again, we've recently implemented is this how I work document, which essentially is every person who works with us is asked a series of different questions of like how they like to be contacted outside of rehearsal. Do they like to be contacted by phone call? Do they hate that? Would they rather have WhatsApp? Would they rather just be emailed? Like, what is going to work best for you? Are there certain things that you can't, do you prefer to be left alone at lunchtime? You know, and you can answer as fully or as like minimal as you want, and you can add and change those kind of documents. But it's kind of opening the space for everyone to kind of say, oh, I know myself, and these are the things that will help me. And it's really useful.
And it's also something that we, yes, as you said earlier, is like we identify as a integrated couple of disabled and non-disabled artists, but it's almost advocating for every company to work in that way anyway, because everyone is different. There is always going to be a range of neurodiversity and neurotypical people in the room. There's always going to be people that have different limitations on their bodies, that have different limitations on their mental health, and all of those things affect the way that you make work. And so I think it's important for us to keep that in our biog, so it just highlights that we do that, but so should you. Yeah. So should everyone. It's I don't think it's something that we are kind of doing on our own, and we should be patted on the back for that. I think everyone should be doing that.
Yeah.
So tell me, in the process, can you tell me a little bit about your devising process, a day in a rehearsal room with you guys to create something like Godot as a Woman?
So as Josie said, there will always be, and we tend to do these days a kind of flexible start. So you have like a soft start at like 9:30, hard start at 10 o'clock, come together, have a check-in. That probably lasts about 15 minutes maybe. And then we will warm up and play games, usually clowning games, probably for about like 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And even then, again, it's kind of depending on where you are in the process, but like a very kind of like off the bat, starting from nowhere, that kind of play is something that will continue for basically the whole session, with things that kind of arrive out of the play that then you kind of may choreograph into more of a thing, or you may kind of have someone who's acting in a directorial way, either one of us, because we often direct each other, or an external director. For Godot, we had the wonderful Laura Colleen, kind of picking up something and being like, right, can we frame this physical play that you've just done with the theme of this? So it starts, there's always space for that kind of freedom, certainly for the first little kind of chunk, certainly kind of two or 3 days at the beginning of the process, I would say. And often games, we're not necessarily talking about playing like really structured games like Zip Zap Boing or, you know, anything like that. It'll be kind of ball games. So one of our favorites, which is one actually from university, is called Follow, Reverse, Free, where you're essentially throwing a ball to another person in the circle, you're following that ball, and you continue to do that as you say follow. And then you add in further rules whereby you reverse your action and you then free your action so that you can go anywhere in the room. Look it up, it's a great game.
Yeah.
But also that there's freedom within that to then remove the ball from it, so it ends up just becoming paths of movement. So, which then becomes really clowny and brings out kind of like status.
And relationships. Like the amazing like scenes and relationships between the different people playing the game that just emerge when you're just playing a ball game is amazing. And we do a lot of that for a lot of time in our devising process, particularly, as you say, in the earlier stages of that process. We just play a lot. And
do you record the things you find? How do you sort of keep the things that you want and let go of the things that maybe aren't going to make it further in the process?
Yeah, more so kind of with the Godot process, there was more often kind of a camera in the room to film certain sections, but we haven't actually got to a point, and it may be something that we do in the future, where we kind of film huge swathes, because that in itself is such a tricky thing to kind of go back through and find things. And I think also with the playing, and it's particularly this when you've got we have to kind of re-find our ensemble, you and I and Jack, when we're in a room together, but even more so if you bring someone else in. So we've had kind of two secondary cast members who filled in Edinburgh, amazing, Ros Watt and Cara Withers, and it's actually, those games are not necessarily always, even in the devising process, a part of building up the ensemble itself, so that we have this kind of shared language. And actually, like, there is a shared language in our room, in our rehearsal room, in our making room, for how we make things, and even having that kind of like basis of like physical status and clown and persona, and how if you bring a new person into the room, you see how the relationships of those people in that room and their clown personas may come to become something more solid, because you start to see how we relate to each other, and who is the higher status and who's the lower status. And interestingly, it changes as well. So for the first two shows, you've been very low status, whereas in Godot, it's like Josie's clown persona has gone like, no, I'm in charge. You just be silly, and I'll be in charge.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? But then that is echoed in the other shows as well. In that I play the low status clown. I think I still play the low status clown in Godot as a Woman as well. But a low status clown that actually has authority to make decisions, which is a really interesting dynamic, and is kind of similar to actually how we work as a producing company as well. Is that it's really reflective of how we are as people.
Tell me more about that, because I was going to ask, there's three of you.
Yeah.
How do decisions get made? I mean, is there the buck stops with this person, or is it like collective?
We have this almost unspoken but very much spoken agreement that we work in a way that we play and we play and we play, and then we either stay together or go away to reflect on what we've done. And often we come to decisions naturally together, but we often find ourselves in situations where someone has a really strong opinion about something, and it's almost like we kind of just we deal with those issues head on, and we just work through it as a three, really. With Godot as a Woman, we did work with a director, which was a really interesting additional person to bring into the room, and gave us a lot of clarity in some places, which was really useful. But I think it often comes back to, what are we trying to say with this piece? What do we mean when we're making this moment? What do we mean when we're articulating this or doing that? And then trying, and once we've kind of agreed on that and that's solid, it's then really easy to go and play and do all sorts of things. And then if someone thinks that we're going too far away from what that decision was, then it gets roped back, pulled back in, and we assess that as a three. we don't really have a buck stops with one particular person.
No, and there's no denying it's tricky. I think that's really important to say, and it's something that we still find difficult, but I don't think actually where we are at the moment that we could confidently implement that, for example, that, you know, and actually it may be something, in terms of the work that we want to go on to make now, we're very much thinking that another show that we make soon, we won't all three necessarily be in it, which will change that dynamic entirely. But yeah, it's, in terms of those decisions, it can become very difficult, but what we're very good at, have become very good at, is knowing when the decision needs to be left there for a moment, like pin that, park that, move on, do something else, come back, see what you think in a moment. And that in itself is really, really useful, because sometimes you feel really passionate about something in that moment, but actually you don't need to make that decision right now, and you come back later and you go, oh, actually, you know, we can have a calmer conversation. But you're right, like those you know, agreements, disagreements, those things happen, but that's also why the ensemble is really, really important as well. And we're incredibly lucky that we have such a kind of bond as a three, that we're quite good at having the, like, no, but I really think this, but I really think this is what I think, you know. But never trying to continue those conversations for a long time. And that's something that sticks with me as well from our training, is it was always do not talk. Like, do not talk. If you find that you're talking for too long, and we can be guilty of it as well.
Incredibly guilty.
You remind yourself that actually go away, do something else, come back later.
And
sorry, go ahead.
No, so there's always times that we fail massively at doing that, and we do get ourselves in knots just talking through the same issue, and then it's really hard to come to a decision. But yeah, that's always the goal, is to be able to create a space where we can make stuff, we can disagree with the stuff we've made, we can want to change it, and then we can talk that through and come to another decision. The ideal world, we would make that decision fairly quickly, but the reality is that those things take time, and especially when people are passionate, like the stuff, again, the stuff we make, the stuff we're talking about is passionate subject matter for us. So we all feel differently about different things, and we all feel very passionately about it. So when someone comes up against something that they disagree with or that they want to change, it's normally quite a passionate reason behind that. So again, the duty of care to each other in that space as well is really important.
So you're a couple weeks in. I don't know how long your processes are to make your pieces, but say what's an average rehearsal process?
We started, it's again, this is an interesting question, because this is our first Arts Council funded show from start to finish.
Okay.
And we started making it in 2019.
With a 2-week R&D.
With a 2-week R&D.
Yeah.
And then we had another 2 weeks of rehearsal before we were going to go into the first London run, which was meant to be 3 weeks, but that was March 2020, so there was a little
we got 1 week of
lockdown,
and then we stopped.
And for us, who'd gone from a process where a clown show about rain probably took about a year to make that show, in our spare time. And follow suit, we had like 3 months and then another sort of year process. We're still refining what that means, but I know that for me, definitely the original 2 weeks of R&D and then 2 weeks of rehearsal would not have been enough time realistically to make a show. And then from that 2020 point where we stopped, we were put on hold, we continued, things were bubbling away, and we all went away and had a break because the world was very scary and strange. But then we all came back and started making again, and we continued making, and we still are making. We still are making changes. There are still things that are getting cut and added to this day, even though the show is published, and we've been doing it for
not necessarily not massive
2 years.
Things, but kind of structurally things. There's been recently just a bit which we swapped around, and it's so much better. You just realise, having done it like that many times, you're like, that's so much better.
I can't believe we were doing it any other way.
I know.
So then you're however far into the process, you're maybe halfway through, or maybe three-fourths of the way through. And so do you have sketches that then move around, or what are the building blocks of the wider piece?
I would say, probably without meaning it, we work in episodes. So Follow Suit had a real structure to it that we were it's the most structured show. You could
predictable.
It's so predictable, but it kind of works in the sense that you're basically with that show you were making a game essentially, and the game is right. You've got these 4 office workers who are working, and then what game do they play to make the office world more ridiculous? And then the man comes in with the body, and then they have to then go back to doing their office stuff, but with this more of a need to distract themselves. So it's just like office game, man comes in with body, more intense office game, man comes in with body, more intense. Yeah. So there's like there's very simple, there's other little kind of things in there as well, but that really has a structure to it. So that was kind of episodic in its way, but I think it's still that you kind of have sections, isn't it?
Yeah, it is vignettes almost of moments, and this show in itself again is in the way that Waiting for Godot is. They are talking about Waiting for Godot, and then they're playing a word game, and then they're talking about Waiting for Godot, and then they're doing a little funny dance, and then they're talking about and what different things do they use to distract themselves or to comfort themselves or to entertain themselves. And we kind of followed that structure a little bit with Godot as a woman, because the concept is that we are on the phone to the Beckett estate, waiting for them to give us the rights.
And that came quite early. So in that first 2 weeks of R&D, as I say, we probably did a good few kind of days of playing. But even within that, we came to the end of that with half an hour of material. And that was basically built around the fact that we were writing letters to the Beckett estate and waiting for a response, and then getting a response, which then in the next R&D became the hanging on the phone.
Yeah, which then becomes the sort of backbone to it. So we know that that's the skeleton structure, is that we're on the phone waiting. So if we did absolutely nothing else, we knew that would continue.
And also, you then know you've got a phone box with a phone with it, right? What can you do with the phone box and the phone with it? So that stuff, that's waiting on the line, and what you can do, and how are you going to wait? What are the different ways we can wait? What would you do? And that's absolute gold for how you start developing those bits. So that came on really early. We also had the music. We'd made dances, so the dances came kind of as separate bits. But then the way that these kind of separate kind of vignettes, as you put it, I think is a great way of putting it, is as an answer to a question, which is why can't people who aren't men do Waiting for Godot, and essentially just interrogating that from all different angles, which is not only about okay, if I looked like a man, even though I'm not a man, would that be okay? Okay, how do we explore that physically? And then, we have at ages, we had this thing about if only men can do it and they eat carrots in Waiting for Godot, how would a man eat a carrot? And how is that different to how a woman eats a carrot? Yeah. And that was a whole thing that we explored for a while. So kind of this link to the original, but then kind of playing on it again, the literal thing of if you could break it down.
Yeah, and how ridiculous and absurd that is. Does a woman eat a carrot differently to a non-binary person? And does a non-binary person eat a carrot differently to a man? And it's just how ridiculous that is in concept.
And then again, with this as well, it's all just different ideas that are popping up. Of course it is. Yeah. But it's that thing with this as well. We knew that we had the structure the first time that we've ever used words in a big way. We knew that we had this kind of the rhythms and the repetitions and the kind of poetry of Beckett to play with, but also loads we wanted to say. Because I remember you being we can't not say anything. We're going to have to say. And there's so much we want to say. And then we did go away and do bits of writing, which was the first time we'd ever done that. Yeah. Sometimes in the room, sometimes not in the room, and come back and then try those kind of bits out.
Yeah, there was some really wonderful moments where we went away and we took Waiting for Godot. There's bits in it where they play ping pong with words, and it's amazing. And they contradict each other, and they're just so silly but so beautifully written, crafted bits of text. So we went away and played with that with
Yeah.
that kind of rhythm. And then there was other bits like the courtroom scene. So there's the latter half of the show is them in a courtroom scene taking the Beckett estate to court. And we, for the first time ever, just went away and wrote scenes.
Yeah.
Which was completely new for us. So, but it felt so necessary.
And that was so late on. In fact, I don't even remember how much courtroom stuff there really was when we got shut down due to the pandemic in March 2020.
There was it was there.
It was there,
but we've developed it a lot.
It was hugely
since
developed
then.
in that kind of time where all we could really do was write rather than be in a room together. So
Yeah,
that's kind of
couldn't play.
Yeah. But in answer to your question,
Yeah.
it is sections, and quite often like a big roll of paper or like, you know, pieces of paper where the things are written and then they are moved around. Essentially, we try them in different orders and
Lots of puzzle pieces and
Yeah.
kind of trying things out in different.
But this
ways.
one, with the kind of the point, the really important point, I think, was where we went, right, okay, there's this kind of has two halves, which is kind of parody of Waiting for Godot, about us waiting for Godot. Then, okay, we've already talked about the fact that that loads of companies have been taken to court over this. Isn't this ridiculous? Let's take them to court. And that, you know, once you get to that point, you then go, and that was probably maybe midway through the process that we got to that point.
So where can we see Waiting for Godot? You guys are on tour, not Waiting for Godot. Where can we see?
Not Waiting for Godot. Well, you probably can see that somewhere.
Yes,
but
where can we
we're not
see
allowed to do
Godot as a woman?
We'll be in Edinburgh Festival for the last 2 weeks of the Edinburgh Fringe
At the
Pleasance
Fourth.
Courtyard, which will be very fun.
Yeah.
At 3:35. I got it right. Did I get
You
it
did.
right? 3:35 every day for the last 2 weeks. And then we're taking it to a few more places afterwards. It's all on our website, Silent Faces.
It's not yet, but
.uk.
there will soon be announcements for Cambridge, Nottingham, Halifax, Doncaster, Chester.
Spoilers.
That's it. Yeah.
Great. And sorry, last thing. Do you have any advice for people who are wanting to make their own work?
Do it. Do it and ask questions.
Yes, ask people for help. I think we spent a lot of time being very impostery about it.
We still are massively imposter syndrome about everything that we do. And while that gives you a good self-reflective, self-critical thing, which makes you, I think, strive to be better, and it's very useful, we also have put stumbling blocks in our own way throughout a lot of our process and to getting to this point. Because I feel like as a young theatre maker, you are always in the position where you feel like someone else has the secrets and you don't have the secrets. And actually, you can just ask people. People are very generous often.
Some are not.
Some
are
aren't
rude, but just
in any
ignore
way.
them.
Yeah.
And someone will give you, will give you advice, even if it's just little bits that you kind of, it's those moments where you're kind of, for me, given permission to do it, that you can do this. And I think for us, a huge thing, and it's been quite a few years again now, but for a long time we didn't go for the money, we didn't go for the funding, and the Arts Council is not a perfect organisation, but you can find the money to make your work,
To pay yourself and pay people around you.
and there's also so many resources everywhere now of people who want to help you to find ways of getting that money as well.
And also the worst thing that anyone can do, whether it's money, whether it's advice, whether it's space, whatever it is you need, the worst thing that can happen is people say no.
Yeah.
But they're only going to say no if you ask in the first place.
Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. I'm afraid we have to leave it there. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and just pick your brains, but thank you for your time. We'll have to leave it there.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you for joining us for the Make It Work podcast. I've been your host, Cluanny Saunders. Please follow us on Instagram at Make It Work Podcast UK. Or if you have any feedback for us, please email us at makeitworkpodcastuk@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. And also please like and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Join us, learn with us, and let's make it work.